It's often said that there are little to no original ideas in Hollywood these days. If it's not a franchise film, a sequel, a reboot, or a remake, it's an adaptation of a play, a novel, or these days a comic book. And let's not forget those ideas stolen from the headlines. When screenwriters read about something that's happened in real life and eyes alight think, there's a movie in this. But of course, Hollywood isn't that interested in accuracy, historical or otherwise, and even less in authenticity, especially when it comes to the nastier end of the cinematic scale. All's well that ends well? Nah, movie makers tend not to care about the disturbing tales where everything turns out okay in the end, where the bad guy gets got or the good guy lives to fight another day. This video is dedicated to those true stories with happy endings that were eclipsed by the rather more famous, horrific versions on the big screen. Now, sometimes that's a good thing, of course. Maybe the real-life version just wouldn't have made such a good movie. But, well, you can be the judge of that. And of course, here be spoilers. So I am Gareth, this is What Culture, and here are 9 real-life happy endings that became disturbing movies. Number 9, The Vanishing, 1988. Directed by George Sleitzer and Tim Krabbe from Krabbe's own 1984 novella, The Golden Egg, the original Dutch version of The Vanishing sees an obsessed man confronted with the sociopath who kidnapped his girlfriend 3 years earlier, determined to find out what happened to her. In Sleitzer's 1988 original, the kidnapper tells the bereaved man that the only way to find out what happened to his lady is to experience it for himself. Damaged beyond repair by his obsession, he agrees, is drugged, and wakes to find himself buried alive. Krabbe's idea came from reading a newspaper article about a tourist who vanished from a coach trip after disembarking at a rest stop. The police had searched for 2 nights, but she seemed to have disappeared without a trace. It became the jumping-off point for his story about 2 lovers reunited in death, and the madman who stood between them. A decade later, curious to find out what had happened in the real-life version of the story, Krabbe did some digging and discovered that the girl had actually been found. In fact, she'd been found hours after the newspaper article he'd read had been published. She just got back on the wrong bus and become lost. Of course, Sleitzer notoriously remade his own movie in 1993 for an American audience, starring Kiefer Sutherland and Jeff Bridges, in which the protagonist is rescued and kills the villain with a shovel. It's difficult to know which alternate ending is more of an anticlimax, really. While we're talking about disturbing films here today, I want to know right now in the comments, what do you think is the most disturbing movie that you've ever seen? Number 8, Escape from Alcatraz, 1979. Don Siegel's compelling, brutal thriller sees career criminals Frank Morris and John and Clarence Anglin engineer an escape from the supposedly inescapable island prison of Alcatraz. Morris is the anti-hero here, charismatic and iconoclastic, while the draconian warden and his thuggish guards are the antagonists. The film has a downbeat ending. The last we see of the escapees, they're clinging to the sides of their makeshift raft as they desperately swim from the island in pitch darkness. The next day, pieces of the raft along with personal items belonging to them are recovered, and the warden is insistent that the men clearly drowned. Although the final teaser, coupled with the audience's understanding of Morris' abilities, leaves it open as to whether the 3 made it to nearby Angel Island or not. Based on the story of the 1962 escape of the real-life Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, Escape from Alcatraz was released 6 months before the official FBI investigation into the escape was closed. That investigation would determine that the 3 men had indeed drowned in the attempt. However, both the film and the investigation ignored the many sightings of Morris and the Anglins over the years, as well as the fact that Rachel Van Miller Anglin, John and Clarence's mother, had received anonymous flowers every Mother's Day until her passing in 1973. And on the day of her funeral, 2 unusually tall women in heavy makeup were reported to have been in attendance. Number 7, Mummy Dearest, 1981. Mummy Dearest was an adaptation of actress Christina Crawford's 1978 memoir about her violent and alcoholic adoptive mother, film star Joan Crawford, and the beatings, humiliations, and abuse she and her brother Christopher suffered at Crawford's hands. Famously garish and camp, Mummy Dearest features one of the all-time great unhinged performances from Faye Dunaway as the supposedly monstrous Joan, and the film's title has become pop culture shorthand for the the trope of the awful, overbearing mother figure. There are some significant differences of opinion amongst the Crawford family and Joan's friends as to how exaggerated the memoir was. However, it appears that the movie may have exaggerated the memoir still further, to the point of parody. Viewed as unintentionally hilarious, Mummy Dearest won the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst Movie upon release. The film ends with Christina and Christopher being cut out of Joan's will, and Christina determining that her mother won't have the last word. Well, if you count the book and then the film as providing that last word on behalf of Joan's apparent victims, then that's true, I guess. However, Christina Crawford went on to have a fulfilled, happy life, going back to school after quitting acting to obtain a master's degree prior to her mother's passing in 1977, and entering the oil industry at the executive level, finally free of her mother's malign influence. If the best revenge is living well, then by the time the movie Mummy Dearest came out, Christina was living very well indeed. Number 6, Midnight Express, 1978. Content warning: attempted sexual assault will be mentioned in this entry. An adaptation of Billy Hayes' book of the same name, and the story of his incarceration in and eventual escape from Turkish prison for attempting to smuggle hashish out of the country, Alan Parker's movie is grim and pitiless but a compelling cinematic statement. It's also a highly sensationalized version of Hayes' story, a film in which the Turkish prisoners and guards are depicted as snarling, violent animals, while the Westerners surrounding Billy are depicted as nobler creatures being treated unbearably cruelly. In the film's climax, Billy, committed to a prison asylum after years of mental and physical torture, escapes by murdering a guard who tries to rape him, stealing a uniform and walking out the door. The film's epilogue explains that he made his way to Greece and safety. But in reality, Hayes' time in prison wasn't remotely as savage. Transferred to a more open prison after giving up his appeal, he simply stole a rowboat 3 months later to escape. Hardly mentally scarred by his experience, Hayes has written several books on the subject and openly expressed regret that the subsequent movie had cast Turkey in such a bad light, commenting on his love for Istanbul. Finally returning in 2007, he even made a public apology to the Turkish people on behalf of the filmmakers in a press conference. Number 5, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, 1986. Based on the real-life story of serial killers Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole, John McNaughton's harrowing, low-budget psychological horror arrived during the decade of the slasher movie, which elevated the spree killer to the status of comic book supervillain, murdering all comers in franchises where the law of diminishing returns was the only true constant. McNaughton refuses to glamorize his grotesque subjects, unflinchingly following these two very ordinary monsters deep into their low-rent depravity. These serial killers don't have operatic backstories, convoluted modus operandi, cool nicknames, or obsessive relationships with the detectives pursuing them. They're just messed up drifters who like killing people. You know, like real serial killers usually are. In McNaughton's film, Henry ends up murdering Otis and his sister and continuing on down the highway alone. The smarter of the two, it was Henry who advocated varying the method of slaughter and type of victim, and never staying in one place for too long, and the implication is that he'll continue killing for as long as he wants. In real life, however, both Henry Lee Lucas and Otis Toole were caught and convicted for their crimes in 1983, and died in prison decades later. Lucas attempted to confess to 600 or so unsolved killings, but like so many of his outlandish fictional counterparts, it was determined that he was simply mythologizing his past, trying to make himself out to be bigger and badder than he actually was. Discounted and discredited, Lucas was just ignored after that. If you're enjoying this What Culture list today, my friend, then hit that subscribe button down below and you will get even more of these fantastic videos in your life. That sounds like a happy ending to me. Number 4, The Revenant, 2015. Nominated for 12 Oscars, winning 3, including Best Director and Best Actor, Alejandro González Iñárritu's epic, savage, beautifully shot western was based on Michael Punk's novel of the same name, which in turn was based on an episode in the life of frontiersman Hugh Glass. In Iñárritu's film, Glass is mauled by a bear and left for dead by members of his fur trading expedition, who also murder his son. Surviving on nothing but white-hot hate, Glass embarks on a mission of revenge. Throw in Leonardo DiCaprio as Glass and Tom Hardy as the racist son of a motherless goat that betrayed him, and you can begin to see why the the Academy got so hot in the trousers over the film. Of course, Iñárritu and Mark L. Smith's screenplay plays fast and loose with historical accuracy, in the name of creating the epic narrative they're after. It's also interesting to note that Eastern newspapers and magazines, desperate for rollicking tales of the wild frontier, were already fictionalizing Glass's life in his lifetime, and that Glass himself never mentioned a bear attack in any historical documents. Not only that, but there's no evidence to suggest that he was married or had children, never mind a half-Pawnee son murdered in front of him. And finally, Glass did go looking for the men who left him to die, but he didn't achieve his vengeance. Instead, according to all the evidence, Glass found and forgave them. That was nice of him. He was most bothered about the loss of his rifle, which he recovered undamaged. Number 3, The Blob, 1958. Astonishingly, Irvin Yeworth's 50s B-movie classic, The Blob, was based on a true story, or at least on an event that actually took place. The movie sees Steve McQueen investigate a meteorite crash site, only to find that a strange, gelatinous creature has fallen to Earth that consumes anything in its path, getting bigger and stronger the more it eats, just like me. In typical 50s B-movie fashion, they discover that the extraterrestrial eating machine can't stand the cold, so they freeze it with fire extinguishers and drop it in the Arctic. The end? Question mark? The story stems from a 1950 police report from two veteran Philadelphia cops, Joe Keenan and John Collins, who claim to have seen a massive glittering mass fall to Earth. Tracking down the crash site, they described it as a pulsating, glowing purple jelly about 6 feet in diameter and around a foot high. Calling for backup only gave them 2 more witnesses to the unearthly phenomenon. One of them tried grabbing a handful, but it instantly fell apart and dissolved in his hand. And after half an hour, the entire mass followed suit. From the report, all 4 policemen believed that the Blob had been alive. But they were not eaten, so that was good. Their encounter was immortalized in print by the Philadelphia Inquirer in the September 27, 1950 issue. An article that 7 years later, and racking his brain for ideas for a new monster movie, screenwriter Irving Milgate remembered and used as inspiration. If only the fictional Blob had evaporated as easily, eh? Number 2, The Serpent and the Rainbow, 1988. Wes Craven's brilliant, lurid tale of zombies and black magic in Haiti is an unjustly forgotten entry in the late horror maestro's body of work. Bill Pullman and Zakes Mokai are excellent in this tale of an anthropologist facing off against a voodoo priest who commands the Haitian secret police. Again, the movie itself was based on a true story, the book of the same name by ethnobotanist Wade Davis. The film's ancillary character of Christoph, the man supposedly buried at the beginning who is later revealed to have zombified, was based on a man glorying in the name of Clavius Narcisse. What a name. The story goes that, hospitalized in April 1962 with a high fever, Narcisse finally passed away and was buried the next day. However, 18 years later, he reappeared back in his home village, apparently returned to life. Clavius' story was that he'd been awake but paralyzed during the funeral, unable to move even as one of the nails driven into the coffin had pierced his face. Ouch. It was determined that Narcisse had been given a cocktail of poisons, including tetrodotoxin and bufotoxin, that together would induce a coma. Supposedly, the man who'd done this to him had then recovered Narcisse after his live burial and dosed him with Datura stramonium, a hallucinogenic herb known as the Devil's Snare, reducing him to a docile servant and putting him to work in the fields. When the wannabe Bokor was murdered by another of his zombie slaves, Narcisse finally recovered and was free to return home. What a story. And number 1, Blackwater, 2007. Written and directed by Andrew Traucki and David Nerlich, Blackwater was inspired by the true story of a horrific crocodile attack on 3 young men in Australia in late 2003. In the film, Grace, her sister Lee, and husband Adam hear tales about how large and aggressive crocs in the swamps can be, like thuggish serial killers reincarnated into the bodies of dinosaurs. But rather than put them off any form of waterway for life, like normal folks without a death wish, the idiots actively go looking for them. It's at this point that the filmmakers lose the audience, because come on, how are we supposed to identify with these people, whose only defining characteristic is their eligibility for the Darwin Awards? Many-fanged prehistoric death comes for them, all except for Lee, the final girl, who manages to shoot the crocodile and get away to live whatever life she has left. But still, Blackwater is a competent, tense horror. David Nerlich disappeared into visual effects, while Andrew Traucki has now made a name for himself making monster movies about apex predators. His movie The Reef is about a shark stalking a reef, and The Jungle is about a monster stalking, you guessed it, a jungle. Of course, in real life, only one of the boys was actually killed. The other two simply waited in a tree until the crocodile got bored, and then they were rescued. But who'd make a movie out of that, eh? The fed up crocodile? I'd probably still watch it.